Welcome to the State of Developer Education, a podcast by Major League Hacking. We explore how technical leaders are creatively tackling the developer education gap to help prepare the next generation of technologists for the real world and build businesses that can adapt to any changes in the technology ecosystem. I'm your host, John Gottfried. Welcome back to the State of Developer Education. This week's episode is with Tim Castillo, who is a developer advocate for the Dagster project. I am so excited to have Tim here. How are you doing today?
Doing great. Yeah. It's for the audience. This is the first work day of 2024. So that means the brain is running slow, but the heart is going strong.
Yeah, it's January 2nd when we're recording this, which definitely a busy day coming back to the office, but also kind of slow. Well, we'll dive right in. I think this will be a fun, active conversation. As you probably know, if anyone's listened before, I love to start with my guests' origin stories. I like to hear where you came from, how you started, and really how you ended up where you are today. So, what's your origin story, Tim?
I'd like to say that I'm a product of the tech community of the 2010s. And that I feel like I'm a reflection of the trending resources and just what was going on with the community at the time. So the early ages of MOOCs and tech meetups. So when I came into college, I didn't come in as a computer science major. I actually wanted to be a dentist growing up. One thing led to another, and I ended up switching into computer science. And I came in with that classic imposter syndrome of just being so far behind of switching into the major that I just had that urge of needing to fix it. So the holiday break before my first intro to CS class, I grinded out a bunch of classic massively online MOOCs or in online classes, your penultimate Harvard CS 50 online course and whatever was casually chilling on Coursera at the time. Gave me a really good foundation to piggyback off of and helped instill that confidence early on. There were other resources like Quincy Larson's classic free code camp, if you're familiar with it.
Yep.
That was everyone's foray into React for a good chunk of time. And aside from that, I went to undergrad in SF. So I went to a whole lot of meetups. I would just wake up, look at pull up the Meetup or Eventbrite app on my phone and be okay, where am I going to grab dinner tonight? Which meetup am I going to crash today? And I was always way in over my head, and definitely not the target. Being an undergrad college student you were not the target audience for these meetups. But it was always awesome being able to chain together the computer science theory with the problems and the things that people were thinking about and presenting at these meetups. And I always left pretty well fed, because being a college student, everyone's just yeah, sure, you can have the rest of our pizza or our Chipotle catering or whatever random trays we had. So yeah, that's why I'd like to think that I'm a reflection of the tech community from the 2010s, just from all those different resources and opportunities that were coming up.
It's funny, I've never actually heard someone describe it that way, but I also have a very particular memory of the tech community circa 2010, because that was kind of when I started as a developer evangelist. And so I was the one throwing a lot of those meetups, at least up in New York. And there was definitely a certain vibe and sort of community feeling to it that has shifted over time. I'm curious, you said that you weren't really the target demographic for those meetups. Did you feel welcome? Did you feel included in them? How was the tech community as a place to be as a student at that time?
Honestly, great. No, I never felt unwelcome. I met so many great, just quick mentors in passing, little 10 to 15 conversations that were formative experiences for me that changed how I viewed and understood where I was going and what I wanted to do. I feel it's a very canonical experience for people with computer science degrees of just I don't know what I'm going to do with this. I feel I'm learning a lot of theory, but I don't know how it applies to actual software engineering, which is a very valid observation. And I was lucky to have the opportunity of talking to all these people and seeing, well, and having them share their wisdom of oh, that thing you just learned in that class last week, that is something that I'm applying right now in trying to figure out how do I optimize this or how do I actually build this out. And so it was really great being like tactile and like the being there viscerally. Everyone at these meetups had such a great demeanor and approach towards education, in which they wanted to, like, they were genuinely there to help share what they were working on, to help elevate the community as a whole. I'm glad I got the benefit from it.
It's definitely a special thing. One of the things I noticed that I thought was a little like atypical, even though you got a computer science degree, you had written somewhere that you really valued getting a computer science degree from a liberal arts college.
Yeah, I went to the University of San Francisco. As I mentioned earlier, I didn't think that I was going to major in computer science. So I didn't like target going to a large STEM focused academic institution or like the quote unquote T1s or whatever. Yeah, I take pride in like going to a smaller liberal arts college where their focus wasn't like necessarily research or cranking out like incubators and such. And I think I genuinely believe that I would have dropped out or flunked out or something if I didn't have like these small courses or small class sizes in the community that I had, like going to like USF or just a liberal arts, like a liberal arts college in general. I feel like it made me so much more well-rounded and also gave me a community that was intimate, that was focused, and people genuinely cared about me learning and about education. I want to say a majority of my professors were either adjunct and like were working at a tech startup at the time or working at some company or were previously at some company and wanted to go back into academia. So everyone there genuinely cared about education. Everyone there genuinely cared about the development and the growth of the students. And I'm lucky I got the benefit from that because I mentioned I firmly believe like if I was at a different institution, I probably would have dropped out because I wouldn't have had the same. I don't believe I would have had the same resources I would otherwise.
How have you sort of like taken that lesson and applied it to your own work as a developer advocate?
I'll say it always boils down to just meeting your developers. Yeah, meeting your developers at where they're at. And it's about that individual care, that individual focus on what is their perspective, what do they need to learn, why are they trying to learn in the first place, and really generally empathizing with who they are. Because in comparison to like software engineering, in which there's a large gamut of people with like computer science degrees, I know so many data engineers who come from a very wide gamut and background because at some point people end up working with data and there's that progression of I don't like this manual process, let me automate it. And okay, I've automated it and it puts that little seedling of okay, what else can I do with this? And that is how some of the greatest data engineers I know got into the field. They come from like clinical settings, healthcare, finance, ops, so on and so forth. Because of that, when it comes to like educating people and trying to get people to understand what data engineering is, the software patterns associated with it, what it means to do data engineering well, it's important to understand the baseline of where people are and meeting the individuals in the context of where they are.
I talk to a lot of people who are, maybe they're working on an API, right? Where you can kind of assume that everyone who's using your API is a software engineer. What changes when you have these multiple different like personas of maybe data engineers, software engineers, hybrids? How does that kind of like shift your strategy?
When it comes to data, it often like boils down to like the business operations and trying to do something with that data in order to improve or like make better decisions for an organization. In some aspects it's slightly harder to teach data engineering or data platform engineering or something or analytics to this wide breadth of backgrounds, but at the same time it also might be easier because you can focus on the business aspects by framing things as well, what's it take in order to get this business to do something, or what's it take in order to like give this team within your organization the ability to make more informed decisions. Some people may not know what certain API protocols are or how certain frameworks work. But if they have the task of moving data around or transforming it or cleaning it up or training a machine learning model, it's helpful to level set into well, what is the actual practical business use case of here? Like, okay, well, why do you need to get this marketing data in the first place? It's because you want to resolve it with your other data from like Salesforce or from like your sales system or something. And you get the luxury of just being able to focus on like, well, what is the actual tangible benefit? It puts you so close to the business. Like being in data puts you so close to business. You can focus on what are the actual bits and pieces of these systems that I'm connecting, and how do I frame it, and how do I build data pipelines off of it.
That makes a lot of sense. So, kind of to summarize what you're saying, or at least like repeat back my understanding of it, there are software developers using something like Dagster, but there's also all of these other layers of the business that interact with it, whether it's like someone doing data operations or compliance or whatever else. And the thing that makes it easy for them all to kind of be on the same page and understand it is that the data translates back into business objectives very, very directly. Unlike something where it's like, how do you justify like a 1% increase to page load time? Like, what are the, like, that's harder to measure. Obviously, it's easy to measure quantitatively, but hard to measure the business impact of something like that.
When it comes to software engineering, you're able to create a ground truth into like how does it relate to the business,
Right.
which is relatable to everyone in the business.
You have this open platform. You obviously have like the commercial product as well. What exactly like are the components of Dagster? Like, can you give a little high level summary for people and explain how the ecosystem sort of fits together?
So Dagster is an open source Python framework that was created roughly around like 2018, 2019 or so. And it's focused on helping people build data pipelines by focusing on the data assets that are getting produced and chaining those together in order to help orchestrate those data pipelines together, whether it might be analytics, ETL, machine learning model training, so on and so forth. The open source product or open source framework, it's there, it's free. You're welcome to use it as much as you'd like. And then in addition to that, it's maintained by Dagster Labs, which is a company I work for. And Dagster Labs provides a cloud deployed managed service version of Dagster called Dagster Cloud. And that comes with a handful of different features that help manage deploying and orchestrating and managing Dagster. We have a really good manifesto written somewhere on our blog about or what we're trying to do when building commercial open source with Dagster, in which you will get all the technical functionality. You will get all of the features needed to actually write data pipelines and orchestrate them in Dagster open source. And that what we're trying to solve for with Dagster Cloud is the operational and infrastructural complexity involved with it. So that might mean trying to, what it means to like host Dagster Cloud. It also means audit logs, your role-based access controls, and try to figure out what it means to scale Dagster Cloud or Dagster and you're in an enterprise, such as being able to track and understand, well, how much does it cost to actually like train that machine learning model or build that table? So things that are like more stakeholder friendly too.
That's kind of cool. I feel like having an opinionated sort of like commercial open source manifesto is probably reassuring for people in the community. I know that like, sometimes there are worries about whether or not a project will stay the same. But like, given how things inevitably evolve over time, stating sort of the philosophy behind it is probably a good way of like, proactively communicating with people about what you're building.
It's great. I mean, that's not to say that like it's easy to decide what features to put in Dagster versus Dagster Cloud, but it does, yeah, exactly. It communicates with transparency, like what we are trying to do,
Yeah.
what people who are signing up for open source Dagster are going to get, and also communicates the value prop of what you're getting with Dagster Cloud, which is that infrastructural and operational complexity that we are trying to help with and solve for.
So I was doing like, background research on sort of like Dagster and all the different resources available. And, like a lot of, DevRel teams, it seemed like there were a pretty wide variety of like educational resources, right? There's docs, there's tutorials, there's, sort of more progressive training programs, which I think you guys call Dagster University. There were like various videos, all sorts of different things. How do you think about like what to put in a particular format? Like, why is one thing a tutorial, another thing a university course, and another thing a one-off like video or doc?
I like to think that there are never enough ways to communicate something. And yeah, there are multiple dimensions to be looking at, like what it takes to produce educational content, whether it might be long, short, medium form, video, text, code snippets, example repos, so on and so forth. We were talking earlier about like what it means to meet people where they're at. That loops back into this, in which like I believe that like in order to meet people at where they're at, it's important to provide as many different ways to consume that knowledge, consume that resource in some shape or form. At Dagster, we take a lot of pride in our support system, in which like we try to answer community open source questions and get in form of GitHub discussions. We have a vibrant Slack community who also asks questions, and we keep track. And well, we keep track of all these answers, and we see like which questions are coming up often. We try to record it. We have a good feedback loop of turning things into a GitHub discussion, turning it into docs. Okay, is it good enough just as docs? Do we need a video off of this? Do we need another example repo? Do we need to go back and flesh out the GitHub discussion? Well, what benefit do we get in text of a code snippet in a GitHub discussion versus something more robust as a, let's say, like a snippet in the docs or an entire guide in the docs? There are many different ways to like educate people on something, and everyone has different priorities and everyone is at a different point in that education or that learning process. So I think it's valuable to be able to provide multiple different ways. And yeah, like we have general heuristics as to help us decide like when we introduce or when we teach something in a different format.
What's an example? Like what would warrant one format over another?
When it comes to stuff like the UI, and when it comes to Dagster is a very code first framework. A lot of things can be configured in code, and such as like, let's say the status of it, like a schedule, whether it's on or off, you can set its default status in code. That's great and all. That's convenient, and and you can definitely like show like code snippets or like a little paragraph in it and like be able to say like, okay, well, yeah, if you just turn this flag on here, it'll work. But it's another thing to just like, just fire up Loom for a good like 3 minutes and just record actually clicking through the UI, actually making those code changes, actually seeing what gets impacted, what gets changed if you try something out. That's an easy example of just trying to differentiate between like, well, you can always just have the code snippet and explain what it does, or have the API reference, but then also you can invest more into here's a video, here's something that interacts with like multiple different applications. So like, yeah, when you're hopping between your IDE and the UI, or when you're showing or clicking across multiple tabs, like yeah, like videos are much more convenient by able to show that very human, that very real context switch.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. A lot of what you're describing here about like, meeting developers where they are, building different types of content where it's relevant. It sounds easy, but it's probably very difficult in practice. Are there any like frameworks that you utilize or general like, I don't know, like guiding principles that you follow to inform that?
Yeah, Bloom's taxonomy as a framework I use a lot in order to help me figure out, well, what gaps do we have? Like, do we have the different hierarchies, the different levels of Bloom's taxonomy like checked off? Like, are people able, like, what are we targeting for in this piece of content? Where do we feel like people are lacking in? So for every new piece of content that we write, like we try to understand, like, well, what are the goals for this? Are we trying to help people understand something? Are we trying to inspire people to create something ourselves or evaluate their different options when it comes to designing a system? It always starts with, okay, well, what's the problem set? What are people trying to like? What are people struggling with that we've identified in our community through talking through different people, seeing what's happening in Slack, seeing what people are asking on Reddit or raising GitHub issues about, and then afterwards, we're like, okay, well, where do we feel like our general sense of community is along the like Bloom's taxonomy over here that we're getting at? And then how do we target that? Where are these weak points that we feel like we could be strengthening, and where can we be elevating the community from here? So yeah, it's to get the context and the anecdotes of individuals and then be able to create that understanding of, well, based on this sample of your individuals, like what does your community look like and how do you upscale your entire community from here?
What are some things that have sort of surprised you about like where the community wants help? right? Because I would imagine with, an active community, especially in open source, people are very vocal about what they're looking for. Is there anything unexpected that people are struggling with or looking for that you all, didn't see coming?
I want to say that a good chunk of questions and something we definitely didn't expect was how many of them just come down to like software design patterns and just writing good software. So there was a point in time where I want to say like probably half the questions we were getting were something that can be solved by just like by applying like standard like factory patterns or understanding how something gets deployed or like how something can be written and built modularly. And there are other questions just like, oh yeah, what's a Python virtual environment? Why do I need to use a virtual environment? What is a module versus a package and so on and so forth. Yeah, that was a good swath of questions. I actually completely forgot about this because we stopped getting them as much anymore. Because last year we focused on a good, like at the time of recording, 10 posts, which is focused on Python for data engineers. It's a series of like 10 mid-level Python focused articles that's made for people who, well, know what Python is. They know the syntax, they know how to navigate it, but they need that bridge to help them become more advanced. Need that bridge in order to like take them to figure out like, okay, I know this Python. How do I bring it to production? In that we cover like stuff like virtual environments, like why is Python suddenly typed? None of these tutorials I learned had typed Python before. What is MyPy? What is Pylance? What is all this going on here? And then goes into like stuff like factory patterns, stuff like what does it mean to like what's a code smell and other like how do you profile your Python code? These were unexpected questions that we were getting a lot of at the time. That's an example of just like, okay, well, here like a common question is like, okay, how do we do this in Python? What is the Pythonic way of doing things? Or just like what does it mean to build good Python software? Yeah, that's an example of content that we produced to help bridge people who knew some Python but wanted to upskill and like level up in their understanding and build something in production.
Cool. I feel like that comes back to what we were talking about earlier, which is that there are different personas and different levels of expertise in your community around all of these different topics. And it's not really safe to assume a certain level of background, even in like programming. Like I remember there's this sort of like apocryphal story at Twilio back when I was there about a product manager implementing Twilio, as a proof of concept to their engineering team to show them that a certain thing was possible. And like none of our content was designed for non-technical people or like product managers, but they were able to kind of like figure it out and brute force their way into it. And it feels like probably a lot of DevRel teams have portions of their audience that have vastly different levels of technical expertise that could benefit from like more fundamental content like this.
Fundamental content that like upskills your entire community is vastly underrated because yeah, like by being able to like invest in your community and having them generally upskill and helping foster that like that desire for education within them, like that gives you strong community members who are super passionate and are willing to contribute back. We have community members in our Slack community who weren't the strongest in Python back in the day, or have only been using Dagster, or were like starting off of Dagster like a year ago or something. And now they are the ones who are like answering questions in the morning on our Slack community as like their morning Sudoku. And they're now answering the questions that like they were asking a year ago, which is just awesome to hear about.
I mean, it also shows that the community is active enough where there is sort of like increasing levels of engagement as people learn more.
Something I've like recently, something like I am still wrapping my head around, and I'm just in general awe of when it comes to DevRel, is how much investing in your community like matters and how much it pays back in huge dividends in terms of just like having a strong, passionate community who like care about you and are invested in the product and its growth and like the feature development. Like we have users who, okay, so Dagster open source does weekly releases. This one time we had a company offsite and we forgot to tell our community that like we weren't going to release that week. And on the day we typically release, I got multiple DMs from users saying, hey, are you okay? What happened to the weekly release? This is what I read when I go to bed at night. And I'm just like, wow, that is an anecdote that like I was not expecting people would actually care that like we missed a release for a week, or that you that's like the last thing you look at night. That is, yeah, that it's just awesome to hear about.
That's really, really cool. So I'm curious, like, I know that you do both meetups and a lot of virtual community building, and that it sounds like you got a lot of your personal start by going to meetups. In 2023, 2024, what do you think the balance is between virtual and in-person community building for DevRel folks?
Oh, this is going to be a hard question. Okay. Um,
There's no objectively right answer. I'm just curious your perspective on it.
I have learned so much and I have developed so much of my footing purely from like Slack communities and Discord servers of other people who like are within my niche or like within data engineering and who talk about and just bond over like what it means to like yeah work in data. So yeah, I would say like yeah, there has been, I mean, yeah, since pandemic, there's been a massive uptick in like online conferences and virtual meetups, which are all great. And I highly advocate people attend those because I've definitely learned so much from them. But like, I want to say that like my secret sauce that I believe that I'm personally invested in and growth in is like online asynchronous messaging communities like Slack and like Discord, because those are communities where people from different organizations all come in and can join and have discussions about, well, what problems are we currently trying to navigate, how have other leaders and how have other people convened in a very like natural and like async casual format. Yeah, there's a Slack community I'm in called Locally Optimistic, and if you are like a leader in the data space, or if you're just like growing and want to learn about data, it is amazing because there's a channel called like Best of LO being locally optimistic, that contains gems of threads of just, hey, like how do you navigate this? How do you navigate like leading a data team? What does it mean to be like the first data hire? What does it mean to be the first engineer? It's my take. Yeah, in terms of like asynchronous online events like Slack communities, Discord channels, those are amazing. And like I'm still also a strong advocate for in-person conferences and meetups. Like I try to go to one in like the Atlanta area like once a month or so. I'm no longer trying to get free dinners anymore, nor are people trying to offer me to let them bring back like their catering dishes. But no, it's great to just meet up with people and share and have those same discussions of just like, okay, well, like what is going on in the community, what is going on in like the industry and what's happening and what's changing, what other trials and tribulations are we all commonly facing. And yes, like I also try to go to like a conference like once a quarter and see where it goes, and those just feel so enthralling. Honestly, I love conferences post pandemic when I did pre, because of like I feel like they have that backbone of those Slack and Discord communities I was talking about, in which people have such a strong like, relationship with the people that they've been talking to like in these different communities, that's really going to a conference just feels like a family reunion, or like just like meeting up with your old college buds
Yeah.
or some old coworkers of just okay, yeah, like we've already got through the awkward stages, let us expedite into great meaningful constructive conversations off of like what we've been talking about, what we've been experiencing.
I was having a similar discussion with someone recently that it feels like internet communities have kind of come full circle. I remember back when I was learning to code, a lot of the stuff you're describing took place on IRC servers. And, it kind of transitioned relatively quickly to like social networks, right? Like most of those conversations moved to, Twitter or like whatever. And it really seems like now it's Discord and Slack, which is basically just another version of IRC, right? And that people are gravitating towards more intimate communities rather than like open by default communities.
Agreed completely. Like I feel like everyone's trying to like I highly recommend anyone to find a strong online community that they want to be involved in, because like one of the best ways to learn, one of the best ways to grow is to have a community to grow with. And so yeah, like definitely try to find your niche, your online community to like foster and grow it. Yeah, because I mean we've been talking about it this whole time. It's just like part of my job is fostering a community that can be upskilled. That is constantly growing in terms of technical acumen or skill set, and it's also super important to be part of one of those communities too, so that you can also benefit from that growth.
Going back to how you got your start, going to a lot of meetups and going to traditional college, like if you were starting today learning to code, what do you think you would do differently?
I would be less afraid. As much as I talk about like the flashes of lightning of just like quick like meeting up with mentors or like meeting people at these meetups and learning from them in a 10 to 15-minute conversation, I wish I had more long-standing relationships with some of them, with a lot of them really, and also took and like reached out for more opportunities that I knew were there, but I was just too hesitant or too afraid or felt too much like an imposter to act on. If you have the resources and the opportunity to go to like traditional college and like study computer science, and like, yeah, definitely go for it. Cause yeah, like as I don't know, the classic 2004 coming of age story, Dodgeball, says like if you can dodge a wrench, you can dodge a ball. Translating that into a computer science degree, I learned how to write a database before I could learn to write a good SQL query. But that gave me so much respect and understanding of like what it meant to write that query because of everything that happened under the hood. So yeah, like if you have the resources, traditional college, if I were to do it all again, I would be less afraid, take more of those opportunities and risks, try to like build better like long-standing relationships with people, and try to create more of those connections so that maybe I wouldn't, write my first SQL query after writing that first database.
That is one of the more cogent examples of computer science education versus applied skill that I've heard. I like the dodgeball analogy too. That was good. Um, uh, Awesome. Well, this has been really, really interesting for me. I always like to end by asking a couple of questions here. Are there any content creators or like tech educators that you follow these days that you think are doing really fantastic work teaching particular skills? You mentioned Quincy Larson earlier, but maybe someone different.
I wish you asked me this one ahead of time so I could pull up LinkedIn and actually tell you. Um, there's this guy named Mark Freeman. Love the guy. He's awesome. He's the one who taught me about like empathy and understanding your audience and meeting them where they're at. He's been writing for now like a few years now, and I've seen like his content develop, and I see like him comment on other content creators like content about his like philosophy and methodology, and it's his focus is on. I think a recent comment he made was just like assume that one, no one cares what you're writing about, and two, your problem is to make sure that, or is to give them a reason to care. That just also boils down to education of just like you should be communicating what the problem is and like what they're trying to learn, like what they like, why a solution is important to them, why a problem is important to them, and care about like what and like care about why it should care to them. Which is yeah, like I mentioned earlier, like the benefits of data. It's just like it's data is so flowing across businesses and organizations, and it's relatively easy to tie it into what is an actual problem that people are trying to solve.
Is this Mark Freeman from On the Mark Data?
Yes, on the mark data.
The last question I have for you, I always think is kind of a fun one. Is there any like aspirational figure that you would love to take to lunch for a couple hours and pick their brain? Like a founder, a scientist, a world figure, someone that you're just like, wow, that person's so cool, and I want to hear how they think about the world.
It's not a specific person. The people who make actual architecture or paintings out of like Lego, like the ones who work for the Lego Botanical Collection or the Lego Ideas, because like those are the people who like take something that is what people literally consider a fundamental building block of just something very like yeah concrete. It's just like okay yeah you build a tower with it, and they're able to like interpret and translate and see like how do you make something into like an actual physical real thing that like analog that people compare to. Have you seen the Van Gogh one? The Van Gogh
Yep.
Starry Night one is intense because like it doesn't directly translate over to like the colors that are exactly on the, but like every piece has its own place. And like trying to understand and think like that thought process of what happens in that is just amazing. But also they also have fun with it. Like have you know like they like randomly sneak in frogs into them, the classic frog piece.
That's awesome. I love Lego. I have a couple Lego sets sitting in the box right now that are on my to-do list to make. So it's definitely been something I've been into since I was a little kid. But yeah, I've never met anyone who's like one of those Lego master builders or anything like that.
Respect to them for thinking like outside the box and like building something from scratch with like a mental model and how they approach it.
100%. Well, thank you so much for the time, Tim. I really appreciate everything you shared. Really enjoyed our conversation. I hope everyone listening had a good listen as well. Definitely subscribe for more of this. We release every week. And happy hacking. The State of Developer Education is brought to you by Major League Hacking. To find out more about Major League Hacking and how we're educating the next generation of developers and helping the world's leading companies reach them, visit sponsor.mlh.io. And make sure to search for developer education in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, or anywhere else you listen, and click like and subscribe so that you don't miss any future episodes. And if you like it, please don't forget to leave a review, and we'll give you a shout out on a future podcast. On behalf of the team here at Major League Hacking, thanks for listening and helping us empower the next generation of technologists. Happy hacking!